Hello. This story is part of a series titled Memories of Tehran. Looking back, it is interesting to see how one event can lead to another and another. How a man at a Coke stand by the name of Agha Reza was able to help me work out a situation with my parents that I was unable to do on my own. Some might say it was the universe's way of teaching me a lesson and conspiring to help me, both at the same time. And if not, at least it makes for a good story. Welcome to Storytime with Kumars. My name is Kayo Jijina, and this is my story titled The Coke Stand. I hope you enjoy it. At the age of 9, I transferred from Bedigah School to Tehran International School, also known as Iran Zamin. Unlike my previous school, Iran Zamin did not have a school cafeteria, and lunch was not a part of the annual paid tuition. Instead of a cafeteria, we had the Coke stand. The Coke stand was the remnants of what seemed to be an old guard shack. It was converted into a kiosk by missionaries after taking over the grounds that once housed the Chinese embassy, although I have heard whispers that it was actually the Russian embassy. The Coke stand was a two-sided kiosk where students and faculty formed a line on one side to purchase concessions such as pop, nuts, candy bars, and ice cream. Agha Reza, or Mr. Reza as we called him, was the person who ran that side of the kiosk, although my memory on this may be lost to time. The woman on the other side of the kiosk was known as Madame. She offered lunch. Each morning, Madame would prepare 2 giant pots full of food and heat them on a 2-burner propane stove. In one pot, Madame boiled hot dogs. By the end of lunch, the water was so murky, you could not tell if there were any hot dogs left in the pot without stirring it. I learned hot dogs have a particular odor when they have been sitting in water for long periods of time. In the second pot, Madame offered her specialty, homemade hamburger, pronounced ham, bear as in berry, and ger as in Gary. The hamburger had the consistency of a sloppy Joe, with her secret spices. The only choice of bread was a hot dog bun made of bleached white flour. If you wanted something to go with your meal, you walked over to the other side and purchased a bag of pufak, also known as Cheetos, or chips. I was confused my first time in America when I went to order a hamburger and looked and tasted nothing like Madame's delicious hamburger. Many of the students who attended Iran Zamin were relatively well off. They always seemed to have the funds to purchase a lunch, a bottle of pop, and even candy whenever they desired. At the time, I had a modest pocket allowance of 5 rials, equivalent to 5 cents. It would only cover the bottle deposit but not the pop. My favorites was an orange drink called Fanta and Coke. I loved pop. The value of pure water for hydration was not emphasized back then, as was reflected by the lack of water fountains at school. After playing hard and working up a sweat, drinking a bottle of pop seemed like the logical thing to do, and the concept of bottled water was as foreign to me as a milkshake. I got to the point where I could finish the contents of a whole bottle without taking a breath. It did not take long for a friend to introduce me to the concept of bottle refunds. If you found an empty bottle and turned it in, the man at the kiosk would refund you 5 rials. The lines at the kiosk were long, and a good portion of your recess time could be spent waiting in line. For many, waiting in line a second time for a 5 rial refund did not seem worth the time. Instead, they tossed their bottles into the bushes when they were done. Just before the class bell rang, signifying the end of recess, a small group of us would set out in search of bottles. The end of recess was a time when discarded bottles were plentiful and the kiosk lines short. With time, Al-Raza began to recognize the small band of would-be bottle finders magically appearing at his counter. Bottles for cash and cash for refreshing cold pop to quench our thirst. One day, Al-Raza began questioning us, asking us if the bottles were ours. By his standards and way of thinking, if the bottles of pop had not been purchased by us, we were not entitled to collect a refund, eventually flat out refusing to issue any further refunds. We challenged his thinking. What difference did it make? If the policy was to provide a refund, and my friends and I chose to do the work, why should we not be entitled to the same refund? Besides, weren't we helping to clear the school grounds of clutter? But the end result remained the same. My Coke supply was cut off, and I needed to find an alternative source. Being a resourceful person, it did not take long to find a new way. I learned by watching others. Some students would ask others for money to purchase concessions. Some of the kids were amenable and others not. It felt like home. There were times when Mom and Dad were open to buying a treat for us, and other times against it. I decided to give it a try, and it worked. My source for Coke had been restored, and I thought nothing further of it. I was happy. Happy until one evening after school, when Mom and Dad asked me to come into their bedroom for a talk and shut the door behind me. They brought up Anwar, a classmate of mine. His father had joined Iran Air about the same time as mine, and they knew each other. They had also been talking. Mom and Dad asked if I had been borrowing money from my school friends. I explained that it was not quite borrowing. The money was a gift. My friends were giving me the money. I explained to my parents the situation of being thirsty, the refused bottle refunds, and how I had learned to ask for money. The kids I asked could either say yes or no. It was up to them, just like Mom and Dad did at home. Dad gave me the rebuttal I had heard many times before. "Son," Dad would say, "if everyone else jumps off the bridge, so must you." If I wanted to be a smart aleck, I would have responded, "Yes, if I wanted to swim." However, I sensed this was not the time for that particular response. At the time, I didn't fully understand what all the fuss was about, but I could see I was in trouble. When Mom explained that Dad had been embarrassed that I was asking for money from his colleague's son, I began to see the bigger picture and understood what this was all about. Before this conversation with my parents, any hint I had dropped, asking for a higher allowance, was never heard. This time, Dad had the presence of mind to ask what I thought a reasonable allowance should be. It came with a disclaimer. "Son, we are not going to let you get spoiled. That is just not our way." My allowance was increased to 40 reals a month, and once a week, Mom would send us to school with money to buy a lunch. That was a pretty good deal, and I was thankful. However, there were a couple of conditions attached. One, I could no longer bum money or borrow money unless it was an emergency. Number two, I needed to pay everyone back that I had asked for money from, and Anwar had to witness me giving the money back. That I could live with.